Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's tips and tricks webinar. We are just going to wait a few minutes before we get started to let everybody come in. I still see some attendees joining. So we're just going to give a few more minutes for people to join in. Maybe they are grabbing some lunch and coming back to their desk. So we are just going to give it a few more minutes. We will get started here in just a few minutes. All right, I see a few more people joining on. Before we get started, just want to remind everyone, if they've got some feedback from today's webinar, stuff that you liked, stuff you didn't like, something that you wanted to see that we didn't cover and you would like to see in a future webinar, please send it to me via email at adam.foyt@devo.com. That's adam.f as in Frank, O-I-T as in toy, at devo.com. I'm the technical marketing engineer here at Devo, and I put a lot of the content for these webinars together. So anything that you guys want to see or any requests for content will be very much appreciated. All right, we're going to get started in just one more minute, literally 60 seconds. I'm going to give one more minute for everybody to jump on, and then we will go ahead and get rolling. Hope everybody's comfortable with some coffee or the drink of their choice. It's a little early for beer here in Nashville, Tennessee, but it's noon out there on the East Coast, so whatever floats your boat. All right. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's webinar, everyone. I am Adam Foyt, your friendly neighborhood technical marketing engineer, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee, where spring has sprung. Things are blooming, and it is nice, still cool, not too hot here in Nashville. I will be the MC for today. I will be fielding questions, but the man of the hour who will be presenting you the juiciest nuggets of content is my esteemed colleague, Darrin Bogue, Senior Solutions Engineer, Architect Extraordinaire, and Devo Product Expert. He is one of my go-to resources for all questions about Devo. He is going to be guiding you through today's tips and tricks webinar, which is I wouldn't say beginner content. It's more of intermediate to creeping up there on expert level content. It's some of his juiciest nuggets of knowledge and experience. And a silent partner today, because she's got some other things going on in the background, is our good friend Zobia, who is our marketing programs and events manager here at Devo. Zobia isn't going to be talking too much today. We will miss her voice, but she is with us in spirit and watching what we're doing. So welcome, Zobia and Darrin. All right. So it's been a while since we've done a tips and tricks webinar. I think the last one we did was back in June of last year. It seems forever ago in today's weird world. So we thought we would bring you another tips and tricks webinar, not a new features webinar. So what we're going to go over today are data search tools and tips. Data search is probably the most frequently used part of Devo. It's where you search and analyze your data. So anything that we can do to make you more successful in analyzing that data so you can take action. So we're going to go over some of Darrin's favorite data search tools and tips. Then we're going to talk about query tips and optimization. Devo's got one of the best query engines out there because of the way we tag our data. Our query performance is lightning fast, up to 7 times faster than the leading competitor, who shall remain nameless. So we already have a great query engine, but just to make sure that query engine is tuned to maximum efficiency, Darrin's going to go over some of those tips for query optimization. Then we're going to talk about custom views, the use cases for custom views, and some tips on creating those custom views. If you aren't using custom views, you definitely should be. It's a great feature of the Devo platform. So Darrin's going to be going over some use cases and tips for that. And finally, everybody's favorite visualization, Activeboards. We're going to be talking about Devo Activeboards tips and tricks to get the best, not just best performing Activeboards, but also the best looking Activeboards for some advanced functionality in there. So some great stuff lined up for you. Should take about 40 minutes. Darrin and I have rehearsed this. Should take around 40 to 45 minutes, depending on questions. We're going to collect those questions in the chat, is the easiest way to get those, and then I will answer those questions at the end. Or Darrin will answer them if they are too hard. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Darrin Bogue, coming to you from Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder, Colorado. There you go. Thanks, Adam, for the intro. So welcome, everybody. I am, as Adam mentioned, a solutions architect here at Devo, and Adam gave a great rundown of our agenda today. So let's dive right in. So, as I go through this, we're going to touch on a few different points, and we'll be pivoting a bit. So the idea here is to give a good set of information and show you some very specific things. So I'll bounce around a little bit in terms of the concepts, but hopefully we can get you empowered to do some cool things in Devo, and as Adam mentioned, optimize your usage. So the first thing that I wanted to start with was how Devo approaches working with query from the time you launch a query. So using the Finder here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to launch a query into this data source, this Akamai Cloud Monitor data source. And what I wanted to point out here was really kind of the basic thing that happens when you launch a query in Devo. And that is the fact that upon launch, you see the entire schema for the table laid out for you, all set, parsed, ready to go. And so the concept here is that what we're doing when we launch a query is what we would consider an implied select all, meaning that if you're familiar with some of the standard SQL and query languages, in Devo we use LINQ, but it's very similar to SQL. There's a concept of selecting the columns or the items that you want to work with when you're doing a query. And one of the most common things you do is you select the columns that you want from the schema. Well, with Devo, one of the advantages of the way that we've approached our data search is that you don't have to know anything about the schema. You can just launch a query and everything's there for you, utilizing an implied select all. But once you have the schema in front of you, once you have the layout of the table, there's some things that you can do to focus your work with the table by manipulating the view of the data. So as you may remember, Devo stores all the data raw in its original format, so we don't do any ETL or complex processing or anything like that. We store it raw, and we present this structured view, this tabular view, as part of the query. So there is a parsing that's going on as part of the query. So in essence, this is just a view of the data, because underneath it's still raw coming out of the repository. So I can do things to manipulate this view. Here, I'm going to show you just, how to turn on and turn off columns. We're going to later in the webinar, we're going to go through and how you can actually really create your own views and persist those so that you can access them later. But from a basic query perspective, I've got two tools that are available to me for working with my columns, with working with my schema and hiding and displaying what I want to see as I work through my query. And I'll keep in mind, this is optional when you work with a query. You don't have to hide things. You can just go in and start, using our point and click interface and do what you want to do. But sometimes when you're dealing with the table, for example, this table where it's very wide, right? There's lots of data points that we are able to parse out of this data source, this Akamai Cloud Monitor data source. So it may be helpful to be able to turn things on and off. So the column manager works in conjunction with this column operations menu to be able to perform this activity. And what I mean by that is the ability to turn off and turn on all the things you want. So I've opened up the column manager, and by using my global select, I can turn off and on everything. I can go through very surgically and just turn off or on the specific things that I'm looking for. I find it very helpful when I'm doing a query to kind of think through what's the question I need to answer, and what data points do I need from my data set in order to answer that question. And that's where I can go through and just kind of center myself and say, okay, I'm going to need this column and the network edge IP and the access activity, those types of things. I can just add what I need and then proceed from there. I can always come back and remove or add more. I've got that flexibility. Another aspect of the column manager that is very helpful is the idea of being able to filter and find the columns that I'm looking for. Like, for instance, say I'm really interested in all the geolocation data that's included in my data set. That's what I need my query on. So one of the things that I can do is I can go in, I could turn everything off, filter by geo, turn just those on. So when I have a filter invoked, this select all is only going to apply to my filtered list here. And so what I want to make sure when I'm using my filter is that I remove or add my filter as necessary. Because if I was thinking I was going to turn on and off everything, and I have a filter added here, I may not get the expected behavior. So just make sure that your filter is invoked or cleared depending on what you want to have enabled or disabled. So here I added a filter. It lets me enable just my geo, and away I go. If I turn that off, it's just going to disable those. If I clear my filter, now I have everything, and I can turn everything back on. So that's the use of the column manager. It also has a secondary benefit in that it tells you the data types. So it really does give you a vertical view of your schema, which can be very helpful when you're doing all kinds of different query operations. The column manager is more, I'd like to equate the column manager, to a kind of like a scalpel. I can get in there and do very specific things. Whereas my column operations menu here, it's more like a hammer. It says, hey, I can just, kind of globally apply. The way that I choose what to apply the column menu items to is I pre-select my column headers by just my columns by clicking on the column headers, and I go into my column manager and I can say, hey, hide everything else, right? Or I can clear and show everything all at once, just re-show my hidden columns, and I can do the opposite, hide everything I've selected, right? So it achieves the same goal, but it's just more of a blunt force approach, if you will. So I'm going to turn everything back on. So one of the things that we've done here is just really manipulating the view from a select all, select star type launch. But what if I wanted to start have my starting point actually only include columns that I'm interested in, not launching and then removing, but actually just only including at launch time. So Devo allows you through the Finder to explicitly do an implicit select statement by using this this table info. So next to each of my launch points, I have an ellipse that gives me some additional things I can do, and it's around selecting the columns. It's the same. This is like the column manager, but prior to launching my query. So here, if I unselected everything and I say, hey, when I launch, I just want these, 5 columns. Now I'm doing an explicit select statement when I apply, and I will even see that reflected here in my code editor. So here's my implied select all. This is me just launching. I don't even have a select statement. And in this version, I went through and I pre-selected the columns that I wanted, and I can see those listed here. Now I still have access to the other columns. I can go through. My column manager reflects what I've selected, but I can actually just add to this statement if I wanted. Say I wanted to have the raw message included, so I can add that and get that information as well. So I can build upon my select just by kind of more standard database type coding. So this is not necessary, but can be very helpful if I've got really wide and really large table sets to just open up with what I want and start my query and get my question answered with the very specific data set from the get-go. Okay, so that is how you can use implied or specific select statements when launching a query. Now let's talk about some keyboard shortcuts. So there are a few very helpful keyboard shortcuts in Devo that allow you to do some specific things. For instance, if I wanted to go in and I see a value, say this IP address, that I'm interested in filtering on, either filtering in or filtering out, including or excluding in my query, I can go ahead and click my filter tool and fill out the form, but there's a great keyboard shortcut, and it's literally just the enter key. So when I mouse over, and you can see that that's 90.222 IP address is slightly highlighted, doing the mouse over and hitting the enter key will automatically launch an equals filter operation, fill out the form for me. So it grabbed the column name, it grabbed the value, and all I have to do is either hit enter again or click on the filter button, and I've invoked my filter. So a great shortcut for quick filter operations. Another helpful keyboard shortcut is the use of the space bar to highlight and view an event in the Devo event viewer. So if I select a row that I'm interested in looking at, and of course, again, this table is very wide, so I've got lots of different data points that are stretched off to the right. But if I highlight the row I'm interested in and just hit the space bar, now I've got the view of that row, that record, in a nice vertical view that's laid out, and I can scroll vertically rather than horizontally and see all the data. I can add additional events to that viewer. You see how my event count is going. Now I've got 1 of 3 because I have 3 selected, and I can use my controls here to cycle through and look at the different events. I can even copy them and download them directly from my event viewer. So getting into that viewer, I've got the option of launching it through my menu, but also just hitting the space bar for a good keyboard shortcut. And a good tool as well is this deselect all. Once I've selected a bunch of things, sometimes I just want to reset. That's how I turn off all of my selections, is through my column operations menu. Another keyboard shortcut that also is view centric is the idea of being able to go in and take a look at a JSON based JSON syntax based element here. This column here is all the original raw message as it was delivered to Devo, and it comes from Akamai in JSON format. So I can hit the P key. I can highlight the field that I want to look at, and by hitting the P key, which stands for pretty print, I get another viewer that we have embedded, which is my JSON viewer. And this allows me to do things like collapse all of the nodes, to expand everything, to go through to understand information around my JSON, the data types that are included, the how many items are in an array, the level that I'm looking at. So it allows, or how many levels are deep it is. So it allows me a nice formatted view of my JSON that enhances my ability to read it, to take advantage of the key pair, and to very quickly be able to read and find my data. And speaking of finding data, it also has a search, so I can do something like search for IPs, and it will. I've got 5 elements here, 5 key values, and I can cycle through them. So again, having these very large messages, this viewer gives me some efficiencies in terms of being able to scroll through and find the data that I'm looking for. Okay, next on our list is CyberChef. So Devo has built into our data search the CyberChef interface. And if you're familiar with CyberChef, or if you're not familiar with CyberChef, it is a tool that allows you to run data operations against content and produce, things like do encryption things, look at different date formats, do URL decodes, look at base 64 value. So maybe you're getting something, maybe doing a threat hunt, and somebody has a piece of malware has sent a base 64 encoded command into the system, and you want to see what that command is. You can quickly use CyberChef to get the string and do the base 64 decode. There's all kinds of cool operations, what they call recipes, that you can use. So how do you leverage this in Devo? So it's done with a keyboard shortcut. So here I'm looking at sorry, I need to get my value here that I wanted to work with. Do and make sure I've got everything turned on here. There's my timestamp. Okay, so here I've got this epoch timestamp, and I don't read epoch. I mean, that happens to be that it's also the event date, but say this is a value that I had and I want to convert this. CyberChef has a great tool for doing that. So I can come in here, I can launch CyberChef, and by mousing over the value that I'm interested in, and I hit the C key, that will transfer this value into my CyberChef interface. Now I can go and I can say, hey, I'd like to see what the timestamp is, and I just apply my recipe, this function. It'll take the input and it'll give me the output. So that C key is the shortcut for moving the value that you're interested in running through the CyberChef recipe from the search interface into the CyberChef interface. And I can add additional values here. I can select this guy, add him as well, and go through. And if I had an operation that would do multiple inputs or required multiple inputs, I can just move those as necessary into my CyberChef interface. Okay, so those are the keyboard shortcuts that I wanted to share. One item to note that after this webinar, we'll be sending out all of the links to our documentation where this content is also detailed in the docs. So you don't necessarily have to, remember everything that I'm saying here. We will also back this up with the documentation, so you have the resource available to you as well. One of the things that you can do in Devo is you can work with your toolbar to include or exclude the tools that are of import to you. You can customize this. So how do we do that? If I open up the menu that contains all of my tools available, so the gear menu, I can go ahead and I can see everything that is available to me from a tool perspective in my search interface. You'll notice that when I mouse over the icon of a menu item, I either get my pointer remains, or I get this hand. If I don't get the hand, that means that tool is already upon my toolbar. It's already been added. But if I get the hand, I can go ahead and grab that and drag it out and place it on my toolbar. And now I've got this tool available to me. This is good for the session. So if I log out and log back in, this will go away. But if I want to persist that, what I can do is I can go into my workspace menu item and I can say save this workspace. So the next time I log on and go into data search, that tool will persist on my toolbar. If I wanted to remove a tool, all I need to do is click and hold. So now I've got my grabber, and I can just drag it over and put it into the trash can that appears. So that allows me to also reorder. So say I wanted chef out front, those types of things. As soon as I make a change, I just need to remember to save my current workspace, and then that change will persist. So I've got complete customization control over my toolbar. Next, I wanted to point out that in a very recent release, we have updated our time picker. So if you've been using Devo, you'll recognize this time interface from Activeboards and potentially from some of our applications. So we've been utilizing this in the product already, and now we've brought it into data search to make sure that we've got this consistent time picking interface because, of course, every query in Devo requires a time scope to be defined, and we want to make that as easy as possible and as consistent as possible across the entire product. So a couple of cool things that you can do with this new time interface are things like, we still have our presets. So if you remember, we used to have a separate menu. Well, now everything's all in one place. Your start, your stop, rather than having to set two different things, you can do it all in one motion. So that's a big upside for working with time. The other thing that this brings to the table is the ability to directly edit the time that you want to work with. So if I wanted to go in here and I wanted to just change this to 2021, I can go ahead and do that. I don't have to use the calendar controls if I don't want to. I don't have to use my scroll controls. These are all still available to me, but I can also just directly edit the time right here in this interface. The other thing that I can do here is I can use, there's a whole language that is associated with with our time. So that we'll send out the doc that details that. But one of the things that you can do is use our language interface in order to set times. So there's all these cool things you can do, you know, plus 1 day, plus 1 hour, you know, a bunch of shortcuts, if you will, in terms of setting your time. One of the most common, and you'll see this in Devo as well, is that with this new interface, I've got my real-time button to turn on and turn off real-time. So real-time sets the time to now and persists it. If I wanted to set the time to now and not be in real-time mode, so you'll notice that when I turn off real-time, it will automatically put in now as my time. But if I wanted to do that just myself, I can literally just type in now, the now interface or value, and it'll convert that for me right there on the fly. Okay, so that is our new, well, not so new, but new to data search time interface. And now let's talk about another helpful tool that's in Devo, and that is our node tree, our search tree here. So with our node tree, what this does is it allows us to see all of the activity that we've done as part of this query. So this one is not that exciting because I've only done a couple of things, but if I go and I open up a query that I've worked a bunch on and launch this query, and I look at this node tree, I've got a lot of different activity that I've done as part of this threat hunt, utilizing my Palo Alto firewall traffic data. This information, all of this version control, if you will, is part of the properties of this search. That means that if I share this search, somebody else opens up this search, they also see all of the activity that was associated with that search. So that gives a couple of advantages to my searching capability. The first is, for me, if I'm going along and you see here that I got to this point in my search and I chose to do a specific set of operations, and then I was like, that didn't maybe it gave me what I wanted, and I opened up the search later and I came back and I said, I don't want to do that, I want to do something different. I can go right back to all these branches, and these nodes are all hot, and not only can I mouse over and see everything that I've done, I can just jump right to any version that I want instantly. So that way it's saving not just my query, but all of the activity. And then when a teammate comes along and say wants to leverage my query, but doesn't need maybe this version, but they're interested in this version, they can just click on the node tree, get that version, and away they go. One tip that I wanted to impart about the node tree is that if I wanted to reset, right? And I said, I want to start fresh. This is the version of the query that I'm interested in, but I don't need all the past history. All I need to do is I can go ahead and use my query editor to copy the version that I want, and I can go right into data search, free text query, paste it in there, run it, and now I've got a clean slate. My node tree is just that one version, and I can start building from there. So that's a tip for resetting, if you will, the node tree. We don't do it in the node tree interface because you still might want to go back to that other version. That all those activities happened, and I don't want to necessarily step on a teammate's data set, query operations. So that's why we allow this to be reset through a new query, but we really do want to be careful about not accidentally resetting somebody's hard work that they may have spent, a lot of time on.
Hey, Darrin, this is Adam. I hate to intrude on you, but one of the things that I really found helpful when I was new to Devo and learning Devo is I would take a query like the one that you just showed that you've worked on and is really useful to you, and seeing how you can go through the iterations of that query in the node tree and see it reflected in the code editor. When my query, like my code writing skills weren't that great, so as you move through the node tree, it would be reflected in the query code editor, and that allowed me to kind of visualize in the query language, right, how these different choices and operations are reflected in the query language. And I found that really helpful to take, like an advanced query that somebody like you had done and be like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. Now I want to do something a little different here. I want to iterate on this query for my own view. And it helped me to kind of understand where in that query code those changes occurred. It was really useful for me.
Me too, actually, because we all started at Devo at some point. And I just remember specifically one of my teammates was doing a query, and I did not understand what she was doing in the code. And I was like, the ability to just click back and forth, clear and here and here, and go, oh, that's what that function does. That's a cool function. It does URL decode. That's what it was. I still remember it. And it's like, oh, I see what she's doing there. And yeah, very definitely a helpful learning tool as well.
Yeah, I know on the screen you can't really see the query editor because you kind of got it hidden there. But if you were to pop out that query editor and move through the node tree, you would actually see that query, the changes reflected in the query editor.
Exactly. So I can have side by side, and then as I add, there's my right, and it's just adding more and more and more, and I can see the code. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So for all you new users out there to Devo, or if you're new on the team and you've got a more experienced user, certainly share those queries, go through the node tree. And for me, as a visual learner who didn't have a lot of experience with LinkQ, it was a very great tool for me to kind of learn the query ins and outs. So sorry about that. I didn't mean to intrude.
No problem. That's actually a great segue, because the next thing that I wanted to talk about was kind of this relationship between the query code editor and the point and click interface, and how you can combine the two to really, again, optimize your query operations when using the interface kind of becomes not redundant, but when you're, for instance, the use case that I'm going to do here is, what if I wanted to take this user ID and I wanted to parse out all 5 of these sections, right? And I wanted to put them in their own columns. I can absolutely use the point-and-click interface to do that, but if I'm doing 5 or I'm doing 30, doing like maybe a full parse of some custom data I just brought in, if I'm doing this repetitive motion, sometimes using the query code editor is actually much more efficient than using the point and click. Maybe I use the point and click interface to generate my initial piece of code, and then I use the query code editor to duplicate. So let's show how that works. So here I've gone in, and what I want to do is exactly what I talked about. I want to take that user ID, and I want to split it out. So I'm going to create a query here where I've got a few columns that I'm working with. So I'm going to go in and use my column menu here, and I'm just going to start with these columns for my query. So I am going to then take my user ID, and I'm going to do the first operation using my point and click interface. So that's why I don't have to remember the code if I don't want to. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a column where I take this first section of my data, and I'm going to split it out into its own column. So I'm going to use my split function, and I'm going to add all my necessary arguments. I'm going to do the separators by dash, and with split, we start with 0 because everything to the left of the separator is 0, and then it goes 1, 2, 3 from there. So I'm going to let the system generate this piece of code for me. But now I want to do the other, like the next 3. And so I'm like, okay, well, I can go in and fill out that form, do it again. Or I can do something here where I can just copy and I can say, I want to do this 3 more times. And I can just change the code very quickly. Right? I can go in. I can, if I've done this where I've done, a full parse, I just use Excel, right? I can do that very quickly as well. And I can run this and instantly I've got my everything split out. So that was faster than the point and click interface. So I leveraged the point and click interface to generate the code, and then I leveraged the query code editor to duplicate and kind of be more efficient when I had a bunch of operations I just needed to do over and over again. The other thing that I can do, of course, with the query code editor is say I have a code snippet that I've gotten from a teammate or whatnot, or I generated from another query, and I wanted to add that to my query. I can just go ahead, I can copy that from one query, and I can bring it over here to another query and just paste it right in. Another thing that the editor allows me to do is to do a nesting. One of the cool things about LINQ, and this is similar with some other query languages as well, but one of the cool things about LINQ is it does allow me to nest my operations. What does that mean? So I've extracted this value out of my original data set, and it's by default, when you do a split, it's going to create a column that puts the value in as a string. But say I wanted this to be an integer. I wanted this to be a number so I can do math with it. I can absolutely use the point and click interface to create a new column and to recast this as a number. I can use the toInteger function and just make it into a number. But with my query code editor, one of the things that I can do is I can actually nest my original operation in the integer function itself and run that. Whoops, what did I get? Oh, I put my paren in the wrong place. Not as smart as Adam made me out to be. And I now have this as an integer. So the advantage here is that as you start to get more advanced in your use of the code, by using the point and click interface, as you saw, it can generate code for me. I can learn from that, and as I get more comfortable, if I choose to do things in code, I can do these types of operations where I can nest things, and I can just be more efficient and maybe even be faster in achieving my goal, the answer and the format that I want for my query. Okay. One of the other things I wanted to point out here was back on the point and click interface was just the ability to enable and disable what Adam was talking about in terms of clicking through, right? So I can click on this part of my query. I just clicked on this this element here, where I brought out this 53, this content, and by clicking on this operation, it gives me two things that I can do. One, I can edit this and change it if I wanted to. But two, I can click on an operation and I can use the X to remove it. So here I've got my source port. Everything is greater than 45,000. And I said, you know what? I want to widen my query. I don't want that. I don't want that filter at all. I can just remove that. And then by going to the end of my query, reinvoke all of the other operations. So it gives me the opportunity to make changes without having to rewrite the entire query. I can just go to exactly where I want to make the change and do that change. But if I said, you know what, actually I did want that, that's where my node tree comes in, and I can go in and just reset. That's one of the big advantages of having all those versions. And if I remove something or make a change that I decide I want to revert, the node tree allows me to do that. Okay. Once I've done all this work in a query, one of the best practices we recommend is to rename the query so that it's easy to find. If it's something that I want to persist, I want to come back to later, I may want to just give the query a name so that I can find it later in my search history, which I'll show in a moment. I have two ways to do that. You just watched me highlight the query name on my navigation menu and change there, but also under my search actions, I can go ahead and rename it here as well. Once I have my query renamed, then I can go and find it very easily in search history. You'll notice that by default, we use the table name as an alias for the queries, but as soon as I rename it, then I can find it using that name. I can search on that, I can filter on that, but also I can always see by clicking on the this code icon, I can see what the code is. So maybe I have some queries that are from the same table, but by clicking through the code icon, I can find the one that I'm looking for. Open it up, and then maybe name it at that point so that later on I've got the advantage of an alias. Okay, so I wanted to next talk about micro-indexing. And this is an optimization that can be brought to your queries that can be very important in terms of your performance and in terms of how fast you can basically get your results, your performance. So if I go in, I'm going to open up this query here. So in Devo, if you might remember that we've got two built-in indexes, if you will, that allow me to find my data, that allow the system to find the data that I'm looking for. The first is how we store the data in terms of time, and the second is what we call the micro-index. I'm sorry, how we store the data based upon time and tag, right? So our storage architecture incorporates when the event occurred and what the event identity is and the ownership, the domain that the event belongs to. So when I come from this vital domain and I access this table at this time, the system, how it has stored the data, it can go right there and find the data. But say even within that data set, it's a very, could still be, millions and hundreds of millions of records. That's where we can use our second type of indexing called the micro-index. And what the micro-index is that after data is ingested, so we don't have to do this indexing as part of the ingest, but once the data is ingested, we very quickly take every single element in an event and we tokenize it. So say this is an element that I'm talking about here. I've got my first name, I've got my last name, I've got an @ sign, a Devo, and a dot and a com. When we tokenize, we use all of the delimiters as the separators for tokenization. So what happens is Darrin gets a little token, my last name gets a little token, the Devo, the com, because automatically we're going to use the dots and the @ signs. Plus, if you have IP addresses or things with pipe delimiters, common delimiters, all those kinds of common delimiters, the tokenization engine, the indexing engine, recognizes those and tokenizes all of the elements, all of the delimited elements. That makes a very small, very fast micro index because Darrin is in there as a token, and it's the same token no matter where that string occurs. So how do you leverage this for needle in the haystack searches. If I wanted to go through and I wanted to find my name all over the system, the best way to do that, the most efficient way to do that, is to invoke that micro index. So how do I do that? The first way is just by using an equal sign. So transparent to you, whenever you say, hey, I want to find an IP address that equals, like in my first example, 90.222, whatever, that will automatically use the tokenized index, the micro index. Don't even have to think about it. The second way is a whole series of other operations, like starts with, ends with. That will all use it transparently. But I can also invoke an operation called toktains. So what this query is doing, this is showing when I invoke this operation, this equal operation, is the microindex used or not? In this case, it's a true. It's using the microindex. If I use this operation called toktains, I've got two types of string searches I can do: contains and contains tokens. Contains tokens will automatically use the microindex in order to find the data. So this is where, when you're writing a query, you want to do a search for an element, like in a raw message or within a column, as much as possible, you want to use this contain tokens operation, because you're going to get much better performance. You can use a contains. Maybe you'll see here, I'll show you when the microindex won't be utilized. You can always go to contains. It's not a problem. It's just, it'll do a bigger search. You will always get your answer, but using contains tokens, if possible, is going to give you your answer faster. So here, I can see that by using this operation, I can find my name. Here, I can also find my first name, right? This is looking for Darrin in my username value here, this email address. So that's used. The second token, that's done as well. But say I do a partial token, right? I just use DAR, right? Well, that's not between a delimiter, so it's not going to use the microindex, but I can also search on that using that other contains. If I do things out of order, that's not going to use the index as well. So I want to make sure that I order my search terms correctly. But I can use wildcards, so I can kind of accomplish the same thing. So say I'm looking in this Devo here, I can use, if there's proximity to a delimiter, I can actually use some additional switches in my toktains call to do left and right searching. The docs will give more details on this, but just keep in mind that you do have some opportunity to do some partial searches depending on where the data resides in the element. So I can search from left or from right with wildcards. As I mentioned, I can do if something starts with and if something ends with. I can use those types of tokenized searches as well. So lots of opportunity to use that microindex. Some is transparent; you don't even have to think about it. Others, you can purposefully invoke it and get that optimization.
Yeah, I know this is a bit of an advanced topic, but Devo's got great queries anyway. But for those customers, and I see some big customers on the attendee list. I'm not going to name names, but I see you guys out there. I know that there are customers on this webinar that have huge amounts of data set in the terabytes. This is the equivalent of supercharging your car. I used to do auto racing when I lived out in Colorado. Actually lived not too far from where Darrin is now. And we had a great track out there. And on race day, I would always put 100 octane gas in my car, which was, it's like $14 a gallon back then, but it makes a huge performance difference, and put your high flow air filter in, and you just get, it's an enormous boost to performance, just those two things. So this is like that, right? It'll just supercharge your query performance if you can use those toktains, especially for large data sets.
Absolutely, and that's one of the big optimizations we always promote as a best practice for sure. So let's pivot now again, and let's go into some of the Activeboard things that we wanted to cover today at the end of our time here. So one of the things I wanted to show was a workflow tip, and that is the ability to duplicate your session into additional tabs. So that gives you the ability to go in and to have multiple tabs open so that you can flip back and forth between different activities that you're doing within your session. So the way that I do that is I just right-click on my browser tab interface, and I choose it from the menu, depending if I'm using Firefox or Chrome or how I want to do it, and I just say duplicate. What happens is the session information is brought into an additional tab. What that means is that if I log out of any one of these tabs, my session has been halted, and I just want to make sure to do a little housekeeping and close all the tabs that were opened through the duplicate process, because the session information is no longer going to be valid. We're making sure we don't have any session spoofing going on as part of our security infrastructure. So here I've gone ahead and I've opened up a new session with Activeboards, and I wanted to give some tips and tricks about how to do some cool things in Activeboards. The first is around what we call spark lines. We call them that. They're also, it's a visualization thing as well out there in the wider world. But the idea of embedding a visualization in an Activeboard table is it can be pretty cool. You can actually get that representation without having a full widget, but you can put it into a field in a column in a table. So how do we do that? So I'm going to go in here and go into edit mode. So again, we'll send you the docs on this, but there's at the high level, there's a specific syntax that you use when you create a sparkline enabled table, and it has a couple of requirements, that there's 2 queries, and then the output is in an array. But again, the docs can give you the details on that. But once you have your syntax in place and you have your query going, you can then go in and turn on the sparkline or the columns utilizing the visual properties for the table widget. So if I go into this sparkline, this is the properties of the sparkline column, and you can see here that I've chosen the format sparkline. I've got 2 formats. I've got column and sparkline that are appropriate. So if I go in here and I take this trend column, if I just have a standard format with that type of query, I get this type of an array. This is all the values over the time period that the query is running. But if I go in and I say, hey, I want to make this into a column, I just choose that, and now I've got the columnar visualization embedded in my table. So pretty cool. It gives you some different ways of looking at your data very quickly. It's much harder to determine kind of your trends by just looking at the numbers, but by putting it into a column form or into the sparkline, you can very easily, not only can you mouse over and see the values, but you can very easily see the trends. Another thing I can do in my table is some conditional formatting, where I can go in and I can say change the color of my value based upon the value. So for instance, if I wanted to go in and I wanted to say, hey, for my status code, I can add a condition that says if my status code is equal to 200, which is a good status code for web, I can go in and I can change that color to green. So now all of my 200s are green. But if I have something that's not 200, I can add an additional condition that says, hey, if it's not equal to 200, I want it to be red. That means I'm having an issue, and I can very quickly highlight those issues within my view. I can add links, I can add flashing GIFs. Again, we'll send the docs on that, but keep in mind that you can use conditional formats to change the vision of the values within the table. So at this point, I want to do a time check, Adam. I know we're at the top of the hour here, which is our slated time. I've got a few more things I can talk about, or we can let folks go. Adam, you on mute?
Yes, I was on mute. Yeah, I think we can keep going for just a few more minutes. I know you're here towards the end.
Okay, great. So the other thing I wanted to show here is our ability with our inputs. So if you're familiar with Activeboards, you know that you can do something like this where you've got an input, like here is a drop-down list with a series of values. And if I click on a value, I can change the results of another widget. So here I just filtered this Voronoi here with just my name, or I can just go and I can see, just what Kyle's been doing. But you may not have known that we also can take this same input and we can make it a multi-select input, where I can say, I want my name and I want Kyle's name, and that's what I want to apply, and I want to see multiple inputs. So how do we achieve that goal? There's two steps. The first is in the query. So let's take a look at the query for this widget, and it's basically the same kind of in the way that we invoke an input in an Activeboard query, where we say take the value, either if it's empty, show me everything, or in this case, if it equals the user email, show me and filter my results by that email. In my multi-select, so this is a one-step process. In my multi-select, if I go in and I take a look at, there's a difference here. So rather than in this one where I have an equal sign, here I've got our is in. So this is saying where the value or values is in the user email, then render. And so this way I can actually apply multiple values to the where clause and then get my result. That is the first key. So I use the is in rather than, which is the arrow, rather than the equal sign. And when I say arrow, that's less than and a dash. That equals an arrow in the code. And then the second step is when I go into my visual properties for a select, I have this multiple options that I can turn on and off. And as soon as I turn that on in conjunction with the appropriate code, now I've got a multi-select, or even I can even do a select all and apply it. And it gives me that option of having multiple values drive a widget input. So with that, we'll leave it there. Adam, do you want to close it out?
Sure. I just see a few questions in the chat. I think I've answered all of them,
Sure.
But Darrin, I wanted to get just your take on this one particular question, which was, hold on here. There we go. One particular question, which was from Julio: what would be the best way to import data into Power BI? So my answer was, what I would do is I would get the data that I wanted in data search, using all the tricks that you just showed, and then I would download that table using the download button in data search to either a CSV or JSON array or whatever it is that you wanted to manipulate the data as, and then import that into Power BI. So that was my answer. But that's for like a limited. Yeah,
there is a more direct way, and really, not to discount your way, which would indeed work, kind of as a one-off, but there is a way to do that with where in Power BI, every time you go to do your visualization, it will get the latest and greatest. And the way that works is through the idea of using OData. So Power BI, Excel, Tableau, they have the ability they have a feature that uses OData, which is a standard interface, or I don't know about standard, but it's a interface that's available. It's an open interface that's available for this type of use case, where you've got a visualization tool that wants to leverage a database platform. In that case, it's Devo. We're doing the calculate, we're running the query, and then by using the OData interface, the query is executed in Devo and the results are returned back into Power BI. And the way that you invoke that is by going into your query. And if you go into the current query menu item, you get this generate OData feed URL. You can generate one that's not authenticated, not recommended, or authenticated. And once you generate that, you get a URL. And when you go into Power BI or Tableau, you can create an OData interface and use that URL as a data source. And now you've got a much more dynamic integration where the query is executed on the fly, the latest versions, the latest data, and your visualizations will be updated for you there. So I think an easier and more robust way of working with those visualization tools.
Okay, great. Hold on, it looks like we have one more last minute question here. It just came in. Will it be possible to export to PDF the widgets by selection? And is that today the export is massive widget by widget in sequence and does not generate well the formats nor the possibility in the layout of a report? I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I think he means the export to PDF function. He doesn't want to do it widget by widget. He's talking about for an entire dashboard, perhaps. I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
So
do you see it down there in the question, Darrin?
Hold on one second. Let me get there.
No, I'll read it. I can read it too if you want, so we can still see.
Oh no,
your screen.
I'm just getting to that screen. One sec. Okay, will it be possible? Oh, I see. So I think what we're talking about here is the Activeboards have an export to PDF, and it exports the entire Activeboard. And depending on the layout, and depending on what you've got on there, sometimes the format in a PDF it's kind of constrained. It's not as wide or whatnot with what you can do on a big screen in the digital realm. But when you export, it takes the whole thing and it tries to do formatting, but sometimes it doesn't always work out the best. And I think what the question is, it would be great if we could export just a widget. Say I just want one widget to PDF. Right now we can export to a single widget to a CSV. We can check in terms of the roadmap for individual widgets to PDF and get back to you on that. I'm not sure where that falls on the roadmap, but we can certainly get back to you on that.
Okay, yeah, I know that we have a new push to PDF or a kind of a new PDF report generator. I guess a new report functionality coming out. It's on the roadmap. But again, like you said, Darrin, I'm not sure when that's going to come out, but it will be out this year. Okay, I think that's just about it. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. Thank you, Darrin, for another great presentation. Like I said, please send any ideas for future content to me, adam.foyt@devo.com, for things that you'd like to see in the future. And thanks for being an engaged Devo customer. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your week, and goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.